Probably one of the most important lessons to be taught in the kitchen are your knife skills. Knowing when and where to use what knives or even cuts are crucial for saving you time in the long run. But before we get into the slicing and dicing, let's talk about picking the right tool for the job. When it comes to a chef's knife, you want something in the 8 to 10 inch range that has a nice even weight for your own personal strength. Let's take a peek at some of my favorites. This is a Western style knife made by Messine. A Western knife has the tang or the extension of the blade running through the entirety of the knife held together with rivets. This is one of my go-tos as I love the weight it holds in the handle. Next we have a Damascus blade, also a Western knife. This one comes from our friends over at Fornasetti Steel. It's produced by melting pieces of iron and steel with charcoal, allowing science to do its thing and make for this beautiful pattern. Then there's my Masono, which yes, also Western, happens to be my favorite knife for a lot of reasons. I've had this knife for years and it always rivals the newer ones I bring on board. With a strong yet thin blade, this thing holds an incredible edge. Last but not least, we have a petty knife, which is a utility style knife in the 4 to 6 inch range. It's the in-between of a paring knife and a chef's knife. A blade made of carbon, this guy holds a great edge and becomes quite colorful when dealing with citrus or acidic foods. Now, not to be a grandma, but anytime you're using a board without rubber edges, you want to use a damp paper towel to keep your board from slipping. Just a pro tip. Let's talk about actually holding a knife. Most people will hold a knife like this. They just grab it by the handle without any type of stability, and this blade could literally go anywhere. You have zero control. Bad news. Let's not do that. Instead, use your thumb and your pointer and pinch the back of the blade. This is called the bolster. And then wrap the rest of your fingers around the handle. This leaves you with great control for swashbuckling, fighting pirates, or in this case, just dicing a bunch of onions. Notice how easily the blade just glides across the board and I have full control. If someone was to bump into the back of me, I'd still have full control. Now, even with that control, if you're not holding your vegetables or whatever you're cutting properly, you're gonna slice off your fingertips. So don't do that. Instead, do the claw method. Use the top of your first knuckle and guide the blade across your cutting board while holding the veggies. You can use your thumb to help guide the veggies into the blade. Keep your fingers tucked back and I assure you, you'll never cut your fingertips off. Promise. You should practice this. It goes a long way. Now that you're the Bob Ross at holding knives, let's get down into the nitty-gritty. We're going to begin with a carrot and start with some basic knife skills. Begin by cutting the top off of your carrot and then cutting the carrot into a manageable size piece for yourself. It doesn't make any sense to be cutting a vegetable that's longer than the actual size of your knife, so make sure to downsize and cut with varying pieces. I then square off my carrot, therefore it won't roll off the cutting board when I'm trying to slice it directly down the middle. I'm first going to start with a julienne cut, which begins by slicing these nice even planks by about 1/8 of an inch thick. Excellent. Once you have these perfect little planks, you can go ahead and stack them on top of each other. I never really go more than 2 high because again, when cutting something so firm, I don't want my knife to roll, even if I am holding it properly. Then we're going to continue to go another 1/8 of an inch thick across our plank, resembling these small little matchsticks. This is called a julienne cut. We're going to take this one step further and do our brunoise cut, which essentially is just a very small dice. Pile up your julienne, and by going 1/8 of an inch thick, go across the julienne, cutting these into very small squares. Next will be our large dice, because I screwed up when making this video and did that first, but hey, give me a break, it's my first video. Notice how I'm pushing the vegetable with my thumb into the blade. Perfect control. These are going to measure 1/2 of an inch by 1/2 of an inch cube. Very simple. Going back, we're going to cover our medium dice. Very similar to how we did our julienne cuts, we're going to cut these into a 1/4 of an inch plank, and then again 1/4 of an inch sticks. Just like how we did our brunoise, we're going to cut them across going by a 1/4 of an inch until we get these, well, medium-sized squares. Now for the onion. There's a lot of ways to cut an onion, and a lot of people have many different superstitions on how to cut one without actually making yourself cry. For example, this method comes from Gordon Ramsay, who believes by leaving the root onto the bottom of the onion will hold together all of the cell walls and juices, preventing you to cry as much. The one idea that's not going to change coming from method to method of cutting an onion is this cool, neat little grid trick. By slicing horizontal into the onion and then slicing vertical across the onion, you just made a little grid that if we went against that grain, we are going to get beautiful, perfect little squares if, well, all of your alignment and sizing was done properly. So keep this in mind. If you're going to do a small dice, just do tighter lines going across vertical and horizontal. If you want to do a larger dice, well, do less lines, making a thicker grid going across horizontal to vertical. Keep in mind to keep that claw technique going as we are guiding our blade with the knuckle of our hands. Once you get to a generous amount of the onion, don't go any further as you will the risk of cutting yourself. Do another little small grid on the corners and then slice again through. Repeating on for the other side until, well, you are left with only the root of the onion. Now, regardless if you decided to keep your root on or off, you are still left with these perfect small diced onions. This is how I normally get rid of my root. I notch a small little V and just pop out that root, so when I am cutting my onion, I can count on cutting through the entirety of the onion and not worrying about having to watch out for any sort of roots. Doesn't really seem like a big deal. It's probably not a big deal, but when you're cutting an onion initially, which you will see in just a few moments, it's easy to cut both axes off of the onion before starting. Now I am cutting a medium dice, which, yes, you guessed it, is done the same exact way, just with, well, larger lines or fewer lines in our grid. Now again, when beginning cutting an onion, I like to cut both axes off, so I don't usually leave the root on there. If you're crying at this point, I suggest you stop being so sensitive when it comes to cutting vegetables. They're just vegetables. No, I'm kidding. Honestly, the biggest tip I can give you is to use a super sharp knife. If you were to use a dull knife when you're slicing through those cell walls, you're expelling all of the oils as they are exploding on your dull knife into the air, which is then making you cry. Rather than if you had a really sharp knife, you're slicing through them really fast, not expelling and bursting them in the air, preventing you from crying. Now, if you've been watching and not listening to me babble, then congrats, I just Miyagi'd you into doing a perfect julienne. Using your blade, cut across the onion itself about 1/4 of an inch thick to get these little julienne slices. These are ideal for, let's say, French onion soup, or really just caramelizing onions in general, as they cook up quite quickly. Now, if you wanted to go a little bit thicker, maybe 1/2 of an inch to a full inch, that would be ideal for, let's say, skewering kebabs, or something like that. Let's quickly go over celery. We won't spend too much time on it, but considering it's part of the basic mirepoix, I feel like it needs to be addressed. Notice there's quite a bit of sand and dirt in that cavity. That's because the bulb is usually fully submerged underground. Even if you're going to clean that, I like to just discard of it anyway. Slice your celery in half, and then in half once more, to get 4 equal-sized pieces. We're then going to line them up and slice them horizontally across the vegetable in 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch thick. We're going after small to medium dice here. Notice how I'm keeping a nice even rhythm while rocking the blade. I'm using my thumb to push the ends of the vegetables into the knife to get a nice smooth slice. Next, we're going to talk about everyone's favorite allium, the garlic. Begin by slicing off that little tip right there. That can sometimes get bitter. Now, watch carefully as this goes quick. For smashed garlic, you're just going to smash it like that. It's really not that exciting. For sliced garlic, you really just kind of want to run your knife through it and slice it up with your blade. Unless you're Paulie in prison, then you want to use a razor blade and go very, very thin for your tomato sauce. No, but seriously, be sure to keep those fingertips back as it's very, very easy to nip yourself here. Now we're going to go over minced garlic. A lot of people have different ways of doing this. You could actually mirror and do the same exact method as we did for the grid when talking about the onion. But here I'm just going to smash the garlic so it's flat and then run my knife through it. And then once I ran my knife through it into some chunks, I'm going to run my knife through it one more time. I'm going to create this little rocking motion in between both of my hands using my knife, going back and forth, ensuring I'm constantly cleaning my blade to make sure I'm getting consistent pieces chopped up. Now you can do this for however long you want your mince to be. If you want something very coarse and you're in a quick jiff, then just run your blade through it for a few seconds. If you want something very fine, something that would virtually disappear in whatever you're putting it in, let's say just melt away in a marinara sauce, then I'd keep rocking that knife for as long as you want. For the sake of this video, I'm actually going to get this quite fine to lead right into our next knife cut for garlic. If you have a recipe that calls for garlic paste and you don't want to use that gross stuff that sits on the shelves at stores, take your finely minced garlic and add a little bit of salt to it. This is going to help dry out some of that moisture. Using the side or the back of the blade, I'm just going to go back and forth, applying mild pressure and smooth out this garlic until, well, we get this nice paste. It's actually quite incredible on how pasty you can get this paste without having to put it through a blender and passing it through a fine mesh sieve or a strainer or something like that. It just takes a little bit of patience and practice and, well, a little bit more patience. Keep going until you have the desired paste and consistency that you're looking for. Last but not least, let's talk about shallots. We're going to cut this very similar to how we cut our onion because, well, shallot's a type of onion. It's in the allium family. Cut off both axes of the shallot and then slice the shallot directly in half, allowing you to easily peel it. Again, we're following the same steps as we did with the onion, and we are going to create that grid. Begin slicing lines horizontally and vertically into the shallot itself. I like to go quite small on my dice, especially if I'm just starting off a sauce or something when it is only going to get a quick flash and I'm not too concerned about them burning. This also goes great very fine if you were making some sort of mignonette for raw shellfish. When you get to the end, again, you could just kind of do a rough chop of the sides. If this is for a picture perfect dish, maybe you don't want to use the end of that onion as it is not as perfect, or you can just keep mincing and running your knife through it as you please. As for the last half of your shallot, we're going to finish strong with, you guessed it, a nice little julienne. Run your knife horizontally across the shallot, about 1/8 of an inch thick, to get these beautiful little julienne slices. When I get to about the end, since this is such a small onion, I like to do a little quarter turn so I avoid slicing off the tips of my fingers. Then I continue running my knife through the top side of that onion. You get these beautiful little julienne pieces that are great for throwing in pickling liquids or really anywhere you would want a shallot. Shallots are great in comparison to onions because they are a little bit milder in astringency and have a little bit more of a sweeter taste. Listen, guys, I hope you enjoyed this nice little knife skills class, and you will be tuning in to future classes themselves. Please be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and do all that fun jazz.